I've got a first-time guest. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Before we begin, I've got a special announcement. On May 8, 2024, we release a full-length documentary. I'm not even going to tell you the name. It'll be a surprise, but not surprisingly, it deals with debt and the history of debt and the hidden and not so hidden ways that debt is impacting our lives today. It'll be released on YouTube right here on the Debt Free in 30 YouTube channel. So please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you're notified as soon as the documentary is released. Or if you're watching this after May the 8th, well, it's already there. So please check it out. Now, on with the podcast. I've got a first-time guest, and we recorded over Zoom, and we had some technical difficulties with the recording of my voice. Fortunately, we recorded my guest fine, so I'll ask the questions again to fill in the blanks, and you can hear her answers. My guest is Amanda Clayman, and she's joining us today from Los Angeles. She is a financial therapist. So my first question to her was, what is a financial therapist?
That is always the follow-up question that I get when I say that I'm a financial therapist, because usually I am the first one that anybody has ever come across. A financial therapist is somebody who really looks at money from a holistic perspective in terms of how money is a part of our overall human functioning and our overall well-being. So we're looking at the cognitive, the emotional, the relational aspects of our relationship with money and the place that it has in our lives. Also looking at financial behavior and what are the elements of our relationship with money that end up being expressed in our behavior with money.
I wanted to have Amanda on the podcast because, unlike me, she's not an accountant, so she brings a different perspective. So I asked her, since she isn't an accountant, what is her background?
I actually am a clinical social worker and coach, and I went into the mental health field. I was a career changer, in fact, who had a big sort of messy experience with money and decided, oh, there's so much to our experiences with money that have to do with our psychology or our emotional life. And that was, for me, enough of a reason to change careers and go into the mental health field and help people look at that role of money.
So now we get to the meat of the conversation. Amanda's clients and my clients have the same issues. Obviously, they have financial problems. But my starting point is the numbers. I add up their debt and help them prepare a budget. I am a numbers-driven guy because, well, I'm an accountant. But Amanda comes at it from a different perspective. So I asked her, what type of person does she help and what does she do?
Well, I will say that we have probably talked to many of the same people, if not the same individuals. But what I mean by that is that a lot of times when people are very confused, anxious, avoidant, they've got a financial problem in their life and they're not even sure what kind of relevant professional they need. I can help in that process of looking at their money, helping explain to them what some of their options may be, and getting them ready to have a conversation with someone like you.
Then I wanted to know about the chicken and the egg. Which comes first? Is it the financial problems that cause the psychological stress, or is it the other way around?
I find that it's often really hard to have clear boundaries around that question, because certainly once we are a self-aware system in many ways. So a lot of times there can be an environmental stressor, like maybe there's something like variable income is a really common kind of a stressor, right? Or someone has episodic work. They have multiple sources of income, or they are going through something where there's a really high expense that they have to deal with. Our reaction to that, including our the emotional context in which that's happening. These things really, there's a lot of interplay. So sometimes the way that we're responding to an initial problem, an initial imbalance, or the way that we're not responding, if we're responding with avoidance, can contribute to the problem becoming more complicated, more entrenched. That can become a whole shame spiral where we then kind of react to the escalation of the problem. So when we're looking at the emotions of our reaction or the stories that we're telling ourselves or how this problem fits in with our sense of identity, what we get is a sense of ourselves in the problem, which can be a really tough place for people to be.
That all makes sense. Someone has variable income, there's a hiccup, and financial problems mount. Which brings us to the financial therapy process. How does it work? What kind of questions do you ask?
So certainly where the rubber meets the road is, what does the financial behavior look like? So some of the things that I'm assessing for is, or are, does this person have regular contact with their money? Do they have a financial management routine? How do they make decisions about money? Do these tend to be impulsive decisions? Do they take themselves through any kind of an analytical process? Do they have access to information? So we're really doing this holistic assessment in order to situate a person in the context of their financial challenge or their financial issue. So there is the reality testing of the numbers. Like, when the person gives me a narrative description of the trouble that they're in with money, when I ask them what the presenting issue is, if you will, does that personal assessment, is that borne up when we start to look at the numbers? Or is the person, is part of the problem that they have a different kind of an interpretation of what's going on? I like to say sometimes that money is where our internal self meets the external world. So we're looking at, like, how is that person, what is the story that this person is telling themselves about the problem or challenge that they have in their life? And then how do we connect that with, as you said, you're a numbers guy, you're looking at the numbers on the page. I want to look at the feelings in the numbers to make sure that this person is able to really do an accurate assessment of what's happening in their life, the financial dynamics, the behavioral dynamics, decision-making dynamics that are contributing to this problem. And then we start to plot a course forward in terms of, like, what resources do you need? What are your options that are available? And clearly I'm doing that in a pretty broad sense, since I'm not, it's not in my licensure or in my scope of expertise to be able to give financial advice or to advise on any legal options. But what I'm helping this person do is to really feel like an agent in their own circumstances. So are they able to access those resources that we've identified? Are they able to sit down and look at the information related to their situation without becoming emotionally flooded, without being reactive to it, without being avoidant to it, et cetera? Those are kind of the skills that we're looking at.
We all live in our own world. We perceive the world differently. We describe our own stories. So, what is a narrative description? What is it? How does it work? What's an example of how someone would describe their financial situation?
So, for example, a person might say something as simple as, I'm not able to save money. Great. I'm not able to save money can have a lot of different contributing factors in it. So we would look at their income and their expenses. Is this a cash flow issue? Or is the problem an under earning issue, which is oftentimes like that's a place where we notice that there's a real sort of interpretive layer that's happening, right? If somebody is under earning and yet they would say that their issue is that they can't save money, then that tells me something, that they're perceiving themselves as personally at fault, when really we're looking at more of a kind of a structural challenge, if that makes sense.
That makes sense, but what if the problem is something deeper, like gambling or something else?
We look at it. I mean, it's kind of amazing. how much personal meaning people really project onto their financial situation. So there can be different ways to interpret the numbers. I would say some of us have an internal comfort level with if we do see this cash flow imbalance and we're not, we're feeling pretty good about our five mistresses. We're not quite as certain about our gambling addiction. Sometimes the person might say, these things are fine. The problem is I need to make more money. So some of us feel much more comfortable pursuing solutions to rebalance our financial equation by bringing in more resources. Some of us have a very strong inclination to try to bring our expenses, our outflows down as low as possible. And a lot of that can come back to messages that we got in our childhood, either about sort of your needs are too much, your needs are expensive, your needs are the problem. There's no room in this family's finances for your needs. That kind of sets us up to look for solutions on the shrinking side of expenses. Versus the problem is you're not big enough, you're not successful enough, you are not doing what you need to do in order to have presence and importance and status and protection and safety in this life, meaning that you would be looking at ways that you need to make more money. Sometimes we run into households and couple situations where we've kind of got two of one or one of each. And then we need to find some sort of harmony of perspectives between the two partners.
I agree with that. So some people will say, hey, I need to make more money or cut expenses. Do you have any practical advice when you're dealing with a couple and they're not on the same page?
Um, Certainly, I would say that one of the best things that we can do is put aside the idea that one perspective is right and the other is wrong. In fact, I would say that that is a misconception that really plagues us in every corner of our financial lives. Making decisions about money is a highly personal, highly idiosyncratic in many ways process. And so when we put two idiosyncratic people together and each of them is trying to prove that they are correct and that their partner has an incorrect and even dangerous point of view, we're really going to get in trouble. So we want to step away from the idea that one person has to win this argument. I really come from a perspective with couples that our unconscious picks our partner, and usually our unconscious picks our partner because there's something in the way that they see the world or interact with the world that actually can be quite complementary to the way that we do things. So for example, when I see kind of the typical profile is that there's often a person who's more kind of like focused on the present, on quality of life. Maybe this person is also the one who has more day-to-day kind of procurement responsibilities inside of that household or that family. And then there's a person who's a little bit more anxious, controlling, thinking about the future, very worried about kind of scanning the horizon and being vigilant for problems that may develop and wanting to kind of catch those and nip them at the bud. And who's correct when it comes to prioritizing the point of view? I would argue that both of those are really, really necessary. And it's when we try to say that one of those perspectives doesn't matter, that really sets us up for certainly some moments of great unhappiness and conflict probably in that household. So coming to a holistic appreciation of the perspectives that both partners bring, and then we can kind of work through a sequence of more strategic steps. So if we identify what's important to us when it comes to money, like really being able to articulate our values, security for the future is a value of mine. Having happiness and enjoying and feeling gratitude for the things that are a part of our daily life, that is a value of mine. Okay, we want to make sure that both of these values are being incorporated in the family's financial life. How do we do that? We practice good communication and listening skills as we explore that, having the framework that we both want to win, we both want these perspectives to be included, that is what winning looks like, as opposed to getting the other person to see it necessarily your way. We can go through a process of being concrete about what we're asking for. So if one partner is saying, well, the problem is that we're not saving for the future, we dig into that. How much is important? to save for the future? How will we know when that value and the expression of that value is being met? How will we know when we have saved enough? Getting into those kind of concrete asks and the negotiation and communication around those concrete asks. What I do is I step in and I can create a container for that process. I can hold that process. Whereas if it's just these two partners or spouses fighting with each other for kind of dominance in that conversation, dominance in the decision making about what's going to happen with the money, we can have all kinds of like outcomes with the money where even if that's successful in kind of solving some of the money issues, it can lead to a breakdown in the relationship. The relationship suffers because somebody is really trying to win that fight. So as I guide that process, I'm coming from the perspective of trying to use the conversations that we're having about money. I call this the what and the how. The what is the financial issue that we're trying to address or solve, and the how is what kind of relational or emotional expression or growth are we experiencing in the ways that we go and find healthy ways in order to address or solve that problem. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Do you work more with couples or individuals?
I think it's about 50-50. It does ebb and flow. Sometimes I feel like I don't know what I find this really funny. I don't know if you notice trends in your business as well, and you're like, what is happening in the greater society that's kind of leading to this trend?
I do notice trends, and I often notice bizarre ones. Like I'll get three people in the course of a couple of days who all have the same first name, which is kind of strange.
Mm.
What trends do you see?
I had 2023 as my year of women with ADHD. Like I just had a really strong trend of people. And that was happening kind of in the broader culture. There was a lot about women kind of being underdiagnosed with ADHD. And I think that we saw kind of more women receiving that diagnosis and getting help. And those women were also looking for solutions around how to better engage with money.
Interesting. So either the problem is greater or the awareness of it is greater. Now, you talked about values and goals. Aren't values and goals really the same thing?
No, not necessarily. Something can be very important to us, and yet we don't have a way to concretize that. I would say that the goal is the concrete kind of expression of how that value would live in our lives. And it's very important in financial wellness work to be able to tie our goals to our values, because otherwise, a significant source of shame that I see and self-recrimination that I see with my clients is that people have a lot of goals that they feel like they should have, but that are not intrinsically important to a person. But they find that if they're sort of not doing the thing, if they're not pursuing the right goals, they feel bad about themselves. So we kind of try to uncover that and figure out what's going on with that, and say like, well, let's put together, let's make a distinction between the goal and then the behavior to reach the goal, and create a goal that may be more intrinsically motivating for a person. So I'll give an example here. Like, we'll go back to the saving thing again. So if somebody says, I haven't saved anything for retirement, but it turns out that this person has a very strong present day orientation. They really, when we talk about future discounting, they are textbook cases of that. They're very attuned to sort of riding the ups and downs and having a very intuitive way of managing their life. Thinking about something as abstract and huge and far off as retirement is not necessarily an intrinsically motivating goal for that person, even though we can all agree that that's a pretty important thing for us to tackle. So what we can do is we can say the behavior of saving is still really important. So let's maybe make a more near-term goal around that. It could be, instead of going on a vacation, like booking that very impulsively and then putting yourself in a situation where you take the vacation and then you pay that off. You put it on your credit card and just pay it off as debt, which is something a lot of people do. we're going to create a goal, a short to medium term goal around saving for that instead. So that can be something because that's more meaningful to the person, because we're not saying retirement's not important and going on a vacation is important. What we're saying is this gives us the opportunity to practice new behaviors. And once that behavioral threshold has been made, and now this person sort of understands the mechanism of deferring gratification, of being able to track a goal, then we can expand that actually into other kinds of goal setting behavior. Now that the person knows how to align their behavior, they set themselves up for success. So we can make that we can help them feel like that success can be incremental and cumulative, and that by that path, by continuing to sort of develop that, we'll get them on the way to the retirement question and hopefully have a good vacation along the way.
Okay, I got it. So a goal is a concrete thing, like I want to retire. So what's a value?
Well, we haven't created a value yet around the retirement. It's just living. Yeah, it's living there as a
I
should.
got it. So that's why you have to dig a little deeper. So the answer to the question, which I asked at the start of the show, what is financial therapy, is that it's digging deeper and also helping develop new behaviors.
Yes, and I would say the other part of that is that we really honor the individual as part of this process, and step back from the idea that there's one particular way that financial health or financial success should look, and we try to help a person feel like the way that they think about and behave with money, the way that they experience their financial life makes sense for what they want and what's important to them, as opposed to just a kind of like a checklist or a formula that they might get from somebody else in the money space.
You want it and need it, so you have to figure it out. So for me, it's a checklist. You got to cut this out. Whereas you're taking a more holistic approach. So you are a therapist and a coach. How can people hire you? I mean, obviously, we got a lot of listeners here in Canada and you're in the US, but I assume you do a lot of work over video. And roughly, how many sessions would you have with a person? And I realize that's probably an impossible question to answer, but hey, it's my podcast. Thought I would ask it anyways.
Actually, no, I have a pretty easy time answering that question. So I want to go back to the coach piece of it. And one of the reasons, so I'm trained as a therapist. I have a master's in social work and have practiced as a social worker and a clinical social worker for many years. But the way that mental health care is structured is that it is licensure is provided by the state. So if I was practicing as a clinical social worker, I would only be able to work with people in the state where I live. And some of that during COVID, there were all of these kind of like emergency allowances that were made, but coaching is not structured the same way. It's not regulated the same way. So as a coach, I am able to practice with people all over the world and coach. And I find that a lot of the work that we're describing kind of in the behavioral realm, it is not at all traditional psychotherapy where there's necessarily a diagnosis and then a treatment plan around that diagnosis. So I'm kind of in that straddly like therapeutic coaching spectrum, if you will, which is where I think I feel very at home in terms of most money issues kind of falling in that realm. Um, and that is a very helpful way, I think, to think about it. And what was the second part of your question again?
Roughly, how long will you be working with a client?
Ah, right. So that is generally 3 to 6 sessions with me. And the way that we break that out, I mentioned the what and the how. So when people contact me, and usually people will hear about me on a podcast like yours, or maybe my name shows up somewhere in the media, and they'll look and say, "Oh, I feel very messy with money," or I have a lot of outsized kind of feelings or impulses that I would like to explore in this realm. What we'll do is develop a scope of work around the what and the how. So I'll ask them, about the presenting issue. What are the challenges that you're currently dealing with? I'll ask the history of the problem. So I imagine in your work as well, when you're looking at people's debt, you want to know the history of the debt. Is that debt that grew slowly over time because there was a cash flow imbalance? Was there an event that happened that caused this debt? But now that event is in the past and this person should be stable moving forward, except that the debt itself is destabilizing, et cetera. So knowing the history of the problem is a big part of that. And then we work out what would progress toward a goal look like. Is it about making a decision? Is it about creating a new practice? So I have a lot of really anxious and avoidant clients who very much struggle to make money and the management of money and sort of looking at the information in their financial life, who really struggle to do that in a consistent way. So a lot of times the work is around a behavioral plan of what a financial management practice and appropriate goals would look like. And I do prefer time limited work. Number one, because I find that it really helps keep people focused on that behavioral outcome. We want to be able to see something that is different by the end of those 3 to 6 sessions. But also because, as I'm sure you can understand, 100% of my clients are in some kind of financial distress. Whether that is a purely emotional distress or whether they are working with some challenging financial constraints. I try to be really respectful of that, even though I feel like there's a high level of value in doing this work. I also want to be able to say to people, this is about what you can expect that work is going to cost.
Great. So going into it, your clients know what to expect. I think that's a great way to do it. I'm going to put links in the show notes to how people can find you. You're on lots of different social media and on YouTube, and you have a podcast on Audible called Emotional Investment, which I'll link to in the show notes. And I know on that podcast, people can listen in to you working with a variety of people so they can get a sense of how you work. And it's obviously very helpful. So Amanda, what would you like to leave people with today?
Yes, what I would like to say is that I have a philosophy that because money sort of touches every corner of our lives in this modern world, and because we project all kinds of meaning onto it, that money issues, once we scratch the surface of that particular issue, often really provide us with opportunities to heal and grow. You know, money kind of surfaces a lot of old meaning in our lives. And I think that it's a lost opportunity when we only look at the kind of structural external elements of a financial crisis. I think that there's a lot to be learned from it. And a lot of shame that we can release when we say, this is something, you know, everybody's dealing with a financial challenge or issue of one type or many types, and that this is a way that we can really kind of get to know ourselves, learn what's most important to ourselves, really do some important work about ranking our values. And that I think that's very exciting, much more exciting in some ways than just the number of zeros in our bank accounts.
That's fantastic. There's a whole bunch of stuff to unpack, and it's important to understand the issues. Amanda Clayman, thank you for being here. That was my discussion with Amanda Clayman, a financial therapist. You can find her at amandaclayman.com, Amanda, CLAYMAN.com, and on YouTube and Audible. I'll put links to everything we discussed in the show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. And a final reminder that on May 8th, we release a full-length documentary. It's awesome, better than anything you're going to see on Netflix or anywhere else this year. So if you've subscribed on the Debt Free in 30 YouTube channel, it's there for you to watch after May the 8th. That's our show for today. My apologies for the audio issues. Thanks for listening and watching. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.